Well, this is where we left off yesterday. This is the Song of Gilgamesh, in which a young man tells a story of love and virtue, as it might be told in the lands between the Tigris and the Euphrates River. This is a picture of Hammurabi's code. Now, Hammurabi was a great leader of the Sumerians. That would be where the Tigris and the Euphrates merge and enter into the Arabian Sea. Hammurabi was the leader. And Hammurabi said that there should be laws for the people. And so he got together with his fellow administrators and he said, if you do this, then this is what's going to happen to you. Now, the Hammurabi codes were quite harsh. Almost all of the, if you do this, you are going to have this done to you, was you are going to be killed. Now, notice, this is not like any writing we have in the United States today. This is an example of something called cuneiform. Now, what you would do is you would go to somebody of authority and you would say to them, I owe you this much money for this particular horse. The other person would agree on a price, and then all of this would be written down in the form of a contract using these symbols called cuneiforms. Now, once the contract was done, the contract would be laid out in the hot sun, and it would bake, and the contract would be hardened. The clay would become hardened, and then it could be maintained for years and years and years. That's how come today we can look at Hammurabi's code and see what it says. Well, let's shift our gears and let's go to Egypt. Now, Egypt is going to last for several thousand years. For our purposes, we are going to divide Egypt into three parts: the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom. Now, for our purposes, we aren't going to worry too much about the New Kingdom. That would be Egypt from 1000 BC to around 100 AD. But several thousand years ago would be the Old Kingdom. And then it is the Middle Kingdom that we tend to remember the best. If you read the Old Testament of the Bible, they talk a great deal about the Egyptians. They're talking mostly about Middle Kingdom activities. Now, Egypt is very hot, very dry, very dusty. It is prone to droughts. And so all life in Egypt revolves around the Nile River and its delta. Now remember, the Nile starts in deepest Africa and flows to the north until it flows into the Mediterranean Sea. The Nile is the longest river in the world. Now, as far as volume goes, it's not even in the top 5. But it does provide enough water that people can farm on either side. Now, the lands along the Nile where it starts is called Upper Egypt. And the lands along the Nile where it ends is called Lower Egypt. So when you become Pharaoh, you are given a hat that has two symbols. One for leader of Lower Egypt, one for leader of Upper Egypt. Now again, here is a map of the world. Can you find the Nile River? Now it would be located right over here. That is the Nile River. It starts in the south and it works its way to the north. Here is the Lower Nile. Here is the Upper Nile. Now, if we look here at a face mask of a dead pharaoh, we can see where he has on his head the two symbols of Egypt. Now, most pharaohs were thought of as gods. Gods who had come to earth to interpret what the other gods thought of. Now again, if you have multi-gods, this is what we call polytheistic. Egypt's a little bit different in that the Pharaoh was considered a god who walked on earth with man. Now, of course, when he died, he would have to be buried so that the gods could take him back into their kingdom. Egyptians believed in what we would call life after death. So when the Egyptian Pharaoh died, he would be given all sorts of things to play with, chariots. He would have food set out, and of course his favorite servants would be taken into the chamber with his dead body, and then the chamber would be sealed, and eventually these servants would probably suffocate to death. But they too would be ensured an afterlife because they had died with their Pharaoh. This is probably the best example of what is left of the old kingdom. A Pharaoh is going to take a piece of limestone and he's going to have it carved so that his face is on top of a lion's body. Now this is what we call the Sphinx. And this is one of the more popular attractions in Egypt today. If you look behind the Sphinx, you can see one of the Great Pyramids. The Great Pyramids were developed during the Middle Kingdom. Now, during the Middle Kingdom, Egypt was ruled by outsiders. Again, if you read the Bible, you know that there were powerful tribes from the Tigris and Euphrates valleys that will come into Egypt and take it over. Now, Egypt used weapons that were made out of bronze, copper, and tin. The Assyrians had weapons that were made out of iron, and when they went into battle, the Syrians could easily defeat the Egyptians. One of the first things the Egyptians did during the Middle Kingdom was to get rid of all of their bronze weapons and go to iron weapons. It was when Egypt was in the beginning of the New Kingdom, we hear about the rule of the Ramesses. Now, in this transition period between Middle and New, we're going to hear about the flight of the Jews led by Moses. Now, if you don't know the story, Moses was born a Jew. Pharaoh had been warned by his priest that this Jew that was born was going to rise up and unite the Jews to flee Egypt. Well, the Pharaoh didn't want that because then nobody would work. So the Pharaoh went about killing everybody within 1 to 2 years of age. Well, Moses' mother, Miriam, is going to take the young boy, put him in a basket, and send him down the Nile. One of the Egyptian hierarchies will see the baby, claim it as her own, and Moses will be given a sheltered life until it becomes known, I guess in his late 20s, that he really was a Jew, and then read the Bible to see how the story ends there. Let's hear more about these pharaohs and Moses.
So a new documentary, Digging Deep, combining history, culture, and religion, attempting to answer the fundamental question, did the biblical exodus from Egypt, with Moses leading the way, actually happen?
So far, there's no documented evidence about the Exodus.
Exodus did not happen in the way that it is described in the text.
How can we prove that?
You look for collapse in Egyptian civilization, and that's where you'll find Moses and the Exodus.
If we can prove there even was an Exodus.
Well, the film chronicles an in-depth archaeological investigation into the search for evidence and answers. It is fascinating. And joining me now, the Patterns of Evidence, the Exodus filmmaker, Tim Mahoney, who happens to be a fellow Minnesotan. Thanks so much for being here, Tim.
Well, it's good to be here.
This is a fascinating project that you worked 12 years on, traveling back and forth between Israel and Egypt and other places. You said that you wanted to find the answers, because you grew up as a Christian and you wanted to know if the Exodus actually happened. Why was it so important?
Well, what originally happened was I actually thought the Exodus had happened before I went to those locations. But when I got there, they said, well, in fact, I was searching for the route of the Exodus because it was an exciting opportunity to make a film about the crossing sites or which mountain would have Moses and the Israelites have gone to. But they said, well, why are you searching for the route when the Exodus never happened in the first place? And that was startling to me.
Okay, so what you showcase throughout this documentary is that your findings after 12 years mean that maybe historians and archaeologists got the timeline wrong. Why?
Well, what ended up happening was most Egyptologists and archaeologists today in mainstream think that the Exodus happened at a particular time, as you're saying, around the time of Ramesses. And so when they've looked at that time, they've actually found that there is no evidence for that. And that was what I was told. And but then I continued. I had a crisis of faith in this a little bit, as we mentioned. And when I looked at it, I thought, well, there's got to be some other answers here because this is such a huge event. And I found other answers from other Egyptologists and scholars who had a different way of looking at things, a different interpretation.
Shifting it back 250 to 400 years. And then after you do that, all these events in the Bible start to line up and there's evidence behind them.
Exactly. There's evidence for 6 major events that the Bible speaks about. And people have just looked at them today and they said, oh, well, that's just a coincidence. Or that's just another coincidence. It couldn't have happened. It only had to happen at this time. So what this film does is it takes a whole new fresh look at it and really says, well, if you're going to look at the story of the Bible, where would you look in history? You know, let's just be open about it and look any place. And that's what the film does. And it finds all 6 of those events in a sequence. And that's why I think this film is so powerful today. And now what I've done is I've allowed both sides to speak, though, as you saw.
Oh yeah, no, it's very fair and balanced, and keeping right with how we do things at Fox as well. And I was sharing with you, my 11-year-old daughter watched it with me. She happens to be studying this in school right now. She thought it was spectacular, and she shared it with her other schoolmates. So we want to tell folks where this is going to be, right, Tim?
Right.
So you don't want to miss this one-night special event. Patterns of Evidence is playing in movie theaters all across the country this Monday, January 19th. And during the movie, I will be moderating a very special panel discussion with a faith-based expert panel, including Father Jonathan Morris, Ruth Graham Lotz, Dennis Prager, and Eric Metaxas. To find a theater near you, log on to patternsofevidence.com and come join us Monday night. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
So a new documentary,
Now, if you would like to watch this film, it's been out for a couple of years, my suggestion is to go to YouTube. You might also want to talk to your religion teachers about this. It's an unusual way to look at a story that is in the Old Testament. All records kept by the Egyptians used a form of writing known as hieroglyphics. Now, hieroglyphics is where we are going to use pictures to tell the story. Now, the people who wrote these pictures were called scribes. So an event would happen, and the Pharaoh would decree that this should be written down, and then the scribes would write it down. Now, this particular picture is taken of a column that was done by scribes to tell the story of a particular pharaoh. This would be located in the heart of Egypt called Thebes. Most of the scribes did their work on papyrus, paper, and then this paper was carefully put away so as not to be damaged. The pictures were sculpted into these pylons. And this is a way where the masses could come and see the stories. This is a way where those from other countries could come and see the story. And even though they may not understand all of the symbols, they could probably get the gist of what is going on. The priests are going to look at the stars. They are going to look at the weather. And all of this is going to be given to the Pharaoh, who then must decide what his kingdom should do. Are we getting ready for a drought? Are we getting ready for a deluge? what should we do to make sure that our kingdom survives? Land is going to be farmed by the peasants. Now, they will make their building materials from straw and mud and water, and then they will allow it to dry. Now, in addition to the peasants, there will be slaves. Now, in the Jews' case, the Jews had been captured from their homeland, and they were taken into Egypt and stayed in Egypt for hundreds of years as slaves. And they were bought and sold by one wealthy Egyptian or another wealthy Egyptian. Only once in the New Kingdom did Egypt experiment with monotheism. Now, monotheism is one God. Now, Amahopta is going to be that God. And when the Pharaoh died, all records of his existence will be erased. Egypt had great wealth, and they could afford a well-equipped army. And the centerpiece of the Egyptian army would be the chariots.
The principal weapon of the chariot was the bow and arrow. But there is a document, the Kola Papyrus, which gives a whole list of different weapons that the charioteer is supposed to carry with it. There's a variety of handheld weapons, such as the mace and the axe. You often see the pharaoh carrying both, or there's another weapon, or a bow and a mace. It's iconic, it's symbolic of him smiting the enemy. That's what Egyptians like to do. They're always talking about when the pharaoh smote the enemy. So they're more symbolic than practical from a chariot, because if you're on a chariot, you haven't got that much reach beyond the wheels. I mean, I could get a man if he's that close, but really if he's that close, we're probably going to run him down anyway. This is something that's used in the rout as you're driving the enemy from the field. We see them using the Kapesh, this iconic Egyptian sword, and again you often see the pharaohs holding that, but again it has limited reach from a chariot. The most perfectly designed sword ever. It's got a curved edge, and curved edges give slice to the cut, and yet if I stick it out from my arm, there is a straight line from my shoulder to the point of the sword, so it will give you a very straight thrust. And if you turn it and pull it out, that nasty little hook will eviscerate a man if you've got him in the belly. And this hook will hook over an enemy's shield. So you can do that, pull his shield down, and strike him in the face. Ambrose tells us that you should carry a shield. The shields were hair-on, hide-covered boards. We see these circles in many of the illustrations. And what I suspect that means is it's inset there so that you can get the fist through it and hold it there. And so in that position, the arm is there, bracing it against arrows. And if we get on the chariot side, and you'll see how it fits between the rail, and I can get view, but I can shield behind it quite quickly. It really is the right size, making this whole vehicle an armoured protection. And I will have armour on as well underneath it. We see two variants in the Egyptian wall paintings. One is that the shield bearer is also the driver. So that would mean Saeed would have to drive with one hand or tie the reins around his waist and use his other hand to protect me, the archer, with the shield. Or sometimes you will see the shield bearer is a separate person and the archer is the person with the reins. So he's driving and shooting a bow and arrow. And presumably that was down to personal preference. One imagines the most glamorous job was to be the driver and the archer at the same time, and that's something we see the pharaohs doing in wall art. And another weapon that you need to carry, especially if you've got the reins tied around your waist, is a dagger. Because if anything breaks, if the pole breaks or a wheel comes off, you don't want to be dragged. So you would need to cut those reins free. There is one other weapon that we see listed in the Kola Papyrus, and that is the javelin. It actually specifically says, carry a javelin of Keter. It's as if it's saying you should have a particular type of javelin for a chariot, a Ketite javelin. Keter is up near Kadesh in Syria. And we see in the wall art, in every illustration, that these javelins have these cords hanging down. Maybe these are throwing cords, which could be twisted like this around it, so that you can throw it from the tail end and give spin to it. The rifled bullet gives spin to give stability to a missile. Imagine that, the Egyptians were onto that as early as the New Kingdom. It's experimental, and I want to try and see how it works. We only see it in the 19th dynasty. We see Seti, for instance, has thrown his javelins into Libyans, chasing them off the battlefield in the rout as the troops are scattered around the fields. I think you have to go quite close. So we're going to go around and see if this works.
Well, I think this would be a good place for us to stop. Again, once we have finished this particular lesson, we will need to have some type of a quiz. I envision that quiz later on this week. I'll talk more about the quiz on Tuesday. Y'all have a good day.